The mansion was silent except for the faint cries of a baby echoing to the grand halls, a sound that seemed almost out of place among the glittering chandeliers and polished marble floors. Sophie, the young maid who had worked for the Billionaire family for years, could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen a lot in her time at the Whitmore estate, but nothing had prepared her for what was happening tonight. In the dim light of the nursery, she watched in disbelief, her hands trembling as she stepped closer, hoping to intervene before it was too late. Clara, the billionaire's fiancée, moved with a strange mix of calm and determination, her eyes fixed on the baby as if nothing else in the world mattered. There was a tension in the air, a kind of heavy stillness that made Sophie's stomach twist into knots. She had always known Clara to be proud and exacting, but this was beyond anything Sophie could have imagined. Every instinct screamed at her to step in, to plead, to stop what was happening, but the words caught in her throat. She knew that challenging Clara could set off a chain of events no one could control. Outside the nursery, the storm raged, lightning flashing against the tall windows and throwing eerie shadows across the polished floor. It seemed to echo the chaos inside, a storm within a storm. The baby's cries grew louder, more urgent, and Sophie's anxiety spiked. She had cared for children before, but there was something about this moment, something about Clara's strange intensity, that made her fear this wasn't just a test of patience. It was something else entirely, something no one could predict. Sophie's mind raced as she tried to remember every warning, every rule she had ever been given about the fiancé. She knew she was walking a dangerous line. One wrong word, one sudden move, and the whole household could erupt in chaos. Yet she couldn't look away, couldn't ignore the unease curling in her chest. Every second felt like a lifetime as Clara continued, her focus unbroken, her hands doing something that Sophie could barely comprehend. In that instant, Sophie realized she wasn't just witnessing a confrontation. She was part of a secret, a tense moment that no one outside the walls of the mansion would ever understand. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, the fear of making a mistake colliding with the desire to protect the innocent. The baby's cries pierced through the room again, sharper, more desperate, and Sophie took a cautious step forward, praying it wasn't too late. And just as she opened her mouth to speak, something happened that made her freeze, her heart stopping in her chest. Clara paused, looking straight at Sophie, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. The room seemed to hold its breath, and in that silence, Sophie knew this was only the beginning. Whatever was about to unfold would change everything, and she had no idea if she was ready to face it. The question lingered in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. What exactly was Clara planning, and could anyone stop her before it was too late? Sophie's hands were still trembling as she took a cautious step back, trying to gather her thoughts. The nursery felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in with every second Clara stayed there, silent but unerringly composed. Sophie had known the fiancé to be meticulous, precise in every move, but tonight that same precision felt different, calculated, almost cold. She couldn't shake the feeling that something far bigger was at play, a hidden tension no one else had seen. Clara had come into the billionaire's life not long ago, but she had a presence that commanded attention. Everyone in the household knew better than to cross her, yet Sophie had always assumed her sharpness was more about social standing than cruelty. Now, standing in the nursery, Sophie realized she had underestimated Clara entirely. There was a determination in her eyes, something that went beyond ambition or pride, something that made the air around her feel charged, like a storm ready to break. Sophie's mind drifted to the baby, a tiny bundle of innocence, who had been part of the family's life for just a few months. Every giggle, every small milestone Sophie had witnessed over the weeks had built a fragile bond, one that now made the tension unbearable. She had watched Clara interact with the baby before, always distant, polite, yet controlling. But tonight was different. Tonight, it was as if Clara had a purpose Sophie couldn't yet understand, and it terrified her. The usual rules of the mansion didn't seem to apply in this room, and Sophie felt powerless in a way she never had before. Outside the nursery, the storm had grown fiercer. Rain pounded against the windows, sending shadows darting across the floor in strange, unnatural patterns. The sound of thunder was almost deafening, and it seemed to match the frantic rhythm of Sophie's heartbeat. Each flash of lightning illuminated Clara's face, sharp and unreadable, making Sophie question whether she really knew the woman at all. She had always assumed she did, having spent months serving the household, learning the routines, anticipating needs. But now, every certainty was slipping away. Sophie's thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of the nursery door, a sound she hadn't noticed before. Someone was approaching, or perhaps someone had been there all along, hidden in the shadows. She held her breath, listening, trying to make sense of the movement. In that split second, her mind ran through every scenario, every possibility, every secret that could explain Clara's behavior. But none of it made sense. Nothing in Sophie's experience had prepared her for this level of tension, this strange, unnerving mystery. As she watched, she realized that the baby's cries had grown quieter, almost hesitant, as if sensing the charged atmosphere in the room. Sophie couldn't tell whether the child's fear was directed at Clara, at the storm, or at something else entirely. And then, for a fleeting moment, Clara looked directly at Sophie, a faint, almost imperceptible smile brushing her lips. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was the kind of smile that hinted at secrets, at plans carefully hidden from everyone else. Sophie's stomach knotted with dread. She wanted to step forward, to do something, anything to protect the baby, but fear kept her rooted to the spot. The tension was unbearable, thick in the air, suffocating almost, and Sophie realized that whatever Clara had planned, it was far from ordinary. And in that moment, Sophie understood that tonight, nothing would be simple. The night had only just begun, and the mansion held secrets that were waiting to be revealed. Secrets that Sophie knew could change everything. The question that refused to leave her mind echoed louder than the storm outside. What was Clara really capable of? And could anyone stop her before it was too late? Sophie's mind raced as she watched Clara gently lift the baby into her arms. There was something in the way Clara moved, so careful, almost delicate, but beneath it was an intensity that made Sophie's skin crawl. She wanted to speak, to call out, but the words stuck in her throat. She wasn't just afraid of Clara's reaction. She feared what might happen if she disrupted the moment. The mansion, usually so orderly and predictable, now felt like a trap, its grand halls and polished floors suddenly threatening, full of shadows that seemed to watch her every move. From the corner of the room, Sophie caught a glimpse of Daniel, the household butler, standing stiffly near the doorway. He had been loyal to the family for decades, but Sophie had learned long ago that his loyalty to Clara, or to whoever held power in the house, could be stronger than his conscience. His expression was unreadable, and that made Sophie more nervous than Clara ever could. Was he observing, judging, ready to intervene, or silently agreeing with Clara's actions? The uncertainty gnawed at her, making the air feel heavier with every passing second. Meanwhile, Clara seemed to be lost in her own world, her focus entirely on the baby. Sophie couldn't tell whether she was comforting, testing, or something else entirely. She remembered the whispered rumors she had overheard from the staff. Stories about Clara's past, about how she demanded perfection, about how she sometimes crossed lines no one else dared to mention. Sophie had dismissed them before, assuming they were just exaggerations or idle gossip. But tonight, those whispers returned with full force, echoing in her mind as she tried to anticipate what might come next. As the storm outside continued to lash against the mansion, Sophie's thoughts flickered to the billionaire himself. He was away on business, unaware of the tension unfolding in his own home. Would he even believe her if she tried to warn him? Or would he dismiss her fears as the anxious ramblings of someone who has spent too much time in the shadows of the estate? Sophie knew she couldn't rely on anyone outside the room. She was alone with Clara, and the baby's safety rested squarely on her shoulders. Suddenly, the baby stirred, tiny fists pressing against Clara's chest. The movement was innocent, yet Sophie noticed a subtle shift in Clara's demeanor. There was a flicker of emotion, something Sophie couldn't quite place, before Clara's expression snapped back to its usual composed mask. It was this unpredictability that terrified Sophie the most. She had seen many expressions, many moods, but Clara's capacity to shift so quickly, to hide what she was really feeling, made every second in the room feel like walking on a tightrope. Sophie's own fears began to multiply. If Clara could appear calm while carrying out something Sophie couldn't yet understand, What else was she capable of? And if Daniel was silently observing, what role would he play when the tension finally exploded? Sophie realized that this was more than a single moment of suspense. It was a web of power, control, and secrets stretching through every corner of the mansion. The baby, innocent and unaware, was caught at the center, and Sophie felt the weight of responsibility pressing harder than ever. The nursery door creaked again, and Sophie froze. She wasn't sure if it was the wind, the storm, or someone approaching. Every shadow seemed to stretch, every sound magnified, and in that silence, filled only by the baby's soft whimpers and the storm's fury, Sophie understood that the night held dangers far beyond her imagination. Whatever was about to unfold would test every limit of courage and loyalty, and she had no idea if she or anyone else would be ready for what was coming next. The nursery felt smaller with every passing second, the storm outside hammering against the windows as if it were echoing the tension inside. Sophie's heart pounded so loudly she was sure Clara could hear it. Yet the fiancée remained focused on the baby, her movements calm, deliberate, almost hypnotic. But there was an edge, a cold precision in her actions that made Sophie's stomach twist. She had never seen anyone so controlled yet so unpredictable at the same time. Daniel, still standing near the doorway, shifted slightly, and Sophie's pulse jumped. Every instinct told her that even the slightest movement might trigger something she couldn't stop. The baby, tiny and fragile in Clara's arms, whimpered again, and Sophie could see that each sound seemed to pull Clara in a different direction emotionally. Sophie's mind raced, wondering what Clara's plan truly was, and whether it was something that could be explained, or something darker, hidden beneath layers of charm and calculation. The shadows in the room stretched unnaturally, cast by the storm's sporadic flashes of lightning, making Sophie feel like the walls themselves were closing in. Every flicker revealed a different angle of Clara's face, sometimes soft and focused, sometimes sharp and unreadable. Sophie's hands itched to move, to reach out, but fear rooted her in place. She realized that at any moment, the balance could tip and no one might be able to stop it. A loud crack of thunder shook the nursery, and the baby's cries escalated into a shrill wail. Clara's grip on the child didn't falter, but Sophie noticed the tiniest hint of hesitation in her movements, a microsecond that seemed to expose a hidden layer of emotion. Sophie wondered if Clara was struggling with herself, or if it was all part of a plan she couldn't yet understand. The thought made Sophie shiver. Every staff member had whispered about Clara's meticulous nature, but no one had ever fully grasped the depth of her control, or the stakes she was willing to play for. Sophie took a shallow breath, her gaze flicking to the door again, half hoping someone might come to break the tension. But the hallway was empty, the rest of the mansion silent, except for the storm and the faint echo of the baby's cries. She felt the weight of isolation pressing down, the responsibility of protecting the innocent tiny life in Clara's arms, and the fear that every second counted. She knew she was teetering on the edge of chaos, and one wrong step, one misread signal, could ignite a chain reaction that none of them would survive unscathed. Then, almost imperceptibly, Clara's eyes met Sophie's. There was a spark there, something unreadable, something that made Sophie's stomach twist with a mixture of dread and anticipation. It was as if Clara was aware of Sophie's every thought, every heartbeat, every flicker of fear. The intensity of that gaze pinned Sophie in place, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch. The baby's cries grew louder again, louder than the storm itself, and Sophie realized that the fragile piece of the room was breaking, splintering into something dangerous, unpredictable. The nursery door rattled on its hinges, the wind howling to the old mansion like a warning, and Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. Every element in the room, the storm, the shadows, Clara's unreadable expression, the baby's cries, combined into a pressure that felt unbearable. She knew that whatever was coming next would test courage, loyalty, and instinct in ways none of them could predict. And in that moment, Sophie understood the truth. The climax was about to unfold, and there was no turning back. The question that hung in the air, thick with tension, was impossible to ignore. What would Clara do next? And could anyone stop her before it was too late? Before Sophie could even process the intensity of Clara's gaze, a sharp sound cut through the storm, a high-pitched alarm from the mansion security system. The sudden noise made both women jump. Clara instinctively tightened her hold on the baby, and Sophie's heart nearly stopped. The alarm was unexpected, an intrusion into the already tense moment, and it immediately raised more questions than answers. Had someone breached the mansion? Was it a false alert? Or was this part of something far more sinister than Sophie had imagined? Clara's eyes flicked toward the source of the alarm, but instead of panic, there was a glimmer of calculation. Sophie realized with a sinking feeling that Clara seemed to have anticipated this reaction. The fiancée's calm returned in a fraction of a second, but now there was a new edge to her movements, a sharpness that made the tension in the room almost unbearable. Sophie's thoughts raced. Whoever had triggered the alarm might not be an intruder. They might be an ally, someone trying to intervene, or worse, someone working against her without her knowledge. Sophie glanced at Daniel, hoping he would act, but he remained rigid near the doorway, his expression unreadable. The butler had always been loyal, but his silence now felt like a warning rather than a reassurance. Sophie couldn't tell whether he would protect the baby, defend Clara, or remain an observer while events spiraled out of control. Each second stretched longer than the last, and the baby's cries seemed louder, more urgent, echoing against the nursery walls like a plea for help. Then, without warning, the nursery's lights flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness. Shadows danced across the walls, the storm outside throwing flashes of lightning that painted Clara's face in sharp angles. In that split second, Sophie noticed something that made her blood run cold. A small envelope lying on the floor near the crib, almost invisible in the shadows, as if deliberately placed there. Sophie's instinct screamed at her to move, to pick it up, but Clara's gaze had shifted toward the envelope as well, a subtle tightening of her jaw betraying the slightest hint of anticipation. Sophie felt a jolt of fear and disbelief. Why would Clara care about a simple envelope in a nursery? And yet, the intensity in her eyes suggested it wasn't simple at all. This was another layer, another secret woven into the already suffocating tension. Sophie realized that the fiancé's actions were never as straightforward as they seemed. There was always another motive, another twist, another plan lurking just beneath the surface. And now, the envelope hinted at something more, a hidden agenda Sophie couldn't even begin to understand. The baby's cries grew frantic, as if sensing the shift in the room, and Sophie knew that the fragile balance of control was slipping. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't just about Clara or the storm, or even the baby. It was about power, secrets, and perhaps betrayal in ways Sophie couldn't yet comprehend. The tension had escalated beyond anything she had faced before, and she realized the night held surprises she wasn't prepared for, with her pulse racing. Sophie understood that whatever was inside the envelope could change everything. It could be a message, a threat, or a key to a mystery hidden in plain sight within the mansion. And as Clara slowly reached toward it, her eyes locked on Sophie's with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the storm and the shadows alike. Sophie felt a chill run through her. The stakes had risen. The conflict had deepened, and nothing in the room would ever be the same again. The question that hung heavy in the air now was more urgent than ever. What was Clara planning? And would anyone, including Sophie, be able to stop it before it was too late? Clara's hand hovered over the envelope for a long, tense moment, and Sophie felt as if time itself had stopped. Every nerve in her body screamed that this moment would define the night, and perhaps the entire household. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Clara opened it. Her eyes scanned the contents, and for the first time that evening, Sophie saw a flicker of something unguarded. Fear, hesitation, maybe even guilt. The baby stirred in her arms, tiny hands reaching out, and Clara's grip softened. Sophie took a cautious step forward, her voice trembling as she finally found the courage to speak. "Clara, whatever this is, we can figure out together. The baby doesn't deserve to be caught in this." Clara's gaze shifted to her, sharp and calculating, but now tempered with something else, a realization, a moment of clarity. The tension in the room was palpable, but the storm outside seemed to quiet, as if holding its breath for what would come next. With a deep, steadying breath, Clara handed the baby to Sophie. The relief that surged through her was immediate and overwhelming, but there was no time to relax. Clara then picked up the envelope again and slowly, deliberately, revealed its secret. It contained a series of documents exposing a hidden threat to the family, plans from a business rival who had sought to manipulate the billionaire's fortune. The fiancée had discovered the plot in secret and had been orchestrating her actions to protect the baby and safeguard the family from a dangerous betrayal. Sophie's shock was immense. She had assumed the worst about Clara, but now she realized that every seemingly harsh move had been calculated to ensure safety, even if it had appeared cruel in the moment. The tension in the room began to shift. Daniel stepped forward, breaking his usual reserve, his voice low but firm. She was trying to protect all of you. It wasn't what it seemed. Sophie held the baby tightly, trying to steady her racing thoughts. The realization washed over her. Clara's enigmatic intensity, her precise control, the eerie calm in the storm. It had all been part of a plan to protect the household from a hidden danger none of them had even suspected. Just as Sophie began to breathe easier, feeling the weight of fear slowly lift, a new sound echoed to the mansion, a faint knock at the front door, urgent and insistent. Clara's eyes narrowed again, sharper than ever, and Sophie's pulse spiked. Daniel glanced toward the door, then back at the two of them, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over," he murmured, the tension in his voice cutting to the fragile relief. The baby whimpered softly, and Sophie instinctively looked down, feeling the fragility of innocence amidst the chaos. Clara's gaze shifted from the envelope to the door, then back to Sophie, and for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in her face. The audience could feel it. The calm after the storm was only temporary. A new layer of mystery had arrived, unannounced, hinting that the mansion still held secrets, and that tonight's events, as intense as they had been, were only the beginning of a far larger story. As the door creaked open, the camera of the mind's eye would catch a silhouette framed by the stormlight, and Sophie's heart sank with the realization that someone, or something, was still watching, still moving in the shadows. Clara stepped protectively in front of the baby, her posture tense, ready for whatever came next. And in that suspended moment, the story left the audience hanging on the edge of suspense. The immediate danger had passed, but the mansion's secrets and the storm beyond its walls were far from over. The silhouette at the door slowly stepped into the light, revealing a familiar face. The billionaire himself, arriving home earlier than expected. His eyes immediately scanned the room, taking in Clara, Sophie, the baby, and the envelope in Clara's hand. Relief and confusion warred across his features, and Sophie realized in that moment how close they had all come to disaster. Clara's intense composure finally softened, and she handed the envelope to him. Her voice steady but calm. "It was necessary," she said simply. "For the baby, for the family." The billionaire took a deep breath, scanning the documents. His gaze softened as he understood the depth of Clara's actions. What had seemed controlling and unpredictable was revealed to be careful, protective, and strategic. Sophie exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her body ease. The storm outside had subsided, leaving only the soft patter of rain against the mansion windows, a quiet reminder that the worst of the chaos had passed. Sophie gently rocked the baby in her arms, feeling the warmth of innocence return after such a tense night. She realized that despite the fear and uncertainty, the moment had revealed something vital. Sometimes, people act in ways that seem harsh or unexplainable, but their intentions can be rooted in protection and care. Clara's determination, while frightening at first, had been a shield, and the mansion's safety and the baby's well-being had been her priority all along. Daniel stepped forward and offered a small, rare smile. "Sometimes we judge too quickly," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The appearances don't always tell the whole story." Sophie nodded, feeling the weight of his words. The night had been a lesson in trust, in understanding, and in recognizing that courage could take many forms, even in the face of fear or uncertainty. The billionaire approached, taking the baby into his arms for a gentle embrace. The child cooed softly, sensing the safety and calm in the moment. Clara stood beside him, her composure returning to its natural grace, no longer tense or unreadable. The events of the night had tested all of them, revealing truths about character, loyalty, and the lengths people would go to protect the ones they loved. Sophie quietly stepped back, allowing the family a moment together. She realized that her role as caretaker and witness had been just as important. She had seen the fears, the intentions, and the hidden layers of the people she served, and she understood now that courage often existed in the quiet, in the moments where one must act despite fear. The mansion, once filled with tension and uncertainty, seemed to breathe again, settling into a calm after storm. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, sunlight beginning to pierce through clouds. Sophie looked around the nursery one last time, noting how even in the grandest of houses, small acts of care and courage could hold the greatest power. Clara gave Sophie a brief nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of the loyalty and bravery she had shown. Sophie smiled faintly, knowing that while the night had tested them all, it also brought clarity and understanding. The baby, safe in the arms of those who cared, cooed softly, a small symbol of hope and resilience. As Sophie turned to leave the nursery, the audience would sense that life at the mansion would continue with new awareness, deeper trust, and an understanding that appearances can be deceiving. The night had ended, but the lessons lingered. Courage is quiet, protection sometimes appears strict, and love often works in ways we cannot immediately understand. And with that, the mansion returned to its peaceful rhythm, the storm behind them in the future, though still unknown, filled with a renewed sense of hope and resilience.